Why buying a condo is a bad idea. Hey folks, my name is Chris at Hauseit. Today we're going to go over this unusual topic because quite often we're promoting the concept of buying condos, especially in a hot market here like in Miami or even in New York. However, we do like to play the devil's advocate, so we're, through our experience and the experience of our customers, we're going to talk about today about some of the cons of buying a condo and what to look out for. The first reason why buying a condo might be a bad idea and might not be to your liking is loud neighbors. So obviously, condo living is a form of community living. You're going to have neighbors perhaps next to you, above and below you. Even if you are buying a penthouse unit, oftentimes there's just fewer numbers of penthouse units on the floor. Perhaps it might be 3 penthouse units on the floor versus 6 non-penthouse units on the floor. So oftentimes, unless you have the entire floor or 2 floors, as in like a duplex, most condo unit owners are going to have neighbors, probably to either side of them. And you never know. I mean, maybe you might have someone living next to you, perhaps who's shorter term of a occupant than you. Maybe it's a short term tenant or someone who's only renting for 6 months or something, or maybe as little as 1 month if the building allows it. Though most buildings do have rules against Airbnb, both in New York and Miami. In New York, actually, it's illegal for Airbnbs under 30 days. But in Miami, for example, many buildings have their own rules anyway. But regardless, you might have a shorter term tenant in place. Perhaps they're there to more party than to live. So you might have noise, and you might have weird habits like not just late night pounding of bass at 4 a.m. when someone comes back from the club, but you might also have weird habits like morning music in the morning when somebody wakes up and it's their morning ritual. So you never know. I mean, there's all sorts of people out there, and part of living in a condo means you have to live with other people in a sense. Of course, walls can be thicker or thinner depending on the building you're in, the age of the building, but some amount of noise, perhaps from time to time is probably unavoidable. The next risk we'll talk about is the risk of having a crazy board of directors, and this is actually quite dangerous just because as a condo unit owner, you are subject to the mercy of the condo board in many respects. When you buy a condo unit, you subject yourself to the condo bylaws. So basically the rules that govern the condo association, which controls many elements of life in a condo building, and mostly to do with stuff that affects other people, such as how the common areas are used and such, perhaps even regulations around noise complaints and carpeting and such, or pets, renting, how long you can rent in the building, parking and such. So there's lots of rules around that folks agree upon through their elected condo board members. But if for some reason you have a condo board that is consists of people that perhaps are quote unquote crazy, or do things that are not to your liking, or perhaps you're in an unfortunate situation where it's a condo board that is very petty perhaps, and you perhaps get on the wrong side of someone who's a condo board member, and they really have a bone to pick with you and find some ways to fine you, really nitpicking at the bylaws and try to find ways to fine you for small infractions, like perhaps you left garbage on the catwalk or something, and then they find a way to fine you $100 here and there, and that gets really tough because as a condo unit owner, you're not on the board. What are you going to do? You basically have to pay the fine, and if you don't, I mean, are you going to dispute it by taking your own HOA to court? Because they will just defend themselves in court with your common charges. So it's kind of a tough situation to be in. So if you do have a crazy HOA or condo board, I mean, that's definitely going to make life potentially difficult. Another risk of buying a condo is to have a a non-responsive or irresponsible building management company. This is often called a managing agent. So typically what happens is the condo board, obviously it's elected volunteers who are typically owners or perhaps investors who own units in the building. They're doing this for free by being on the condo board, but day-to-day management, they can't be spending time themselves, supervising the various building staff and such. So there's often a third-party building management company. These are often professional agencies who do this, who often manage many buildings. They're pros. And so they're hired by the condo board, and they get paid a monthly fee and such, and they manage the building day to day. They'll prepare all the finances, budget. Really, they run the building essentially. And this, of course, can be problematic. I mean, usually it's not an issue. Most managing agents are good, do a great job. But if you come into a condo building where the building management company is very unprofessional, perhaps they're unresponsive, perhaps they don't respond to you period at all. Sometimes even if you are on the board, they won't respond to anyone but the board president, whom they think they have a special relationship with, and don't even bother responding to questions by anyone else, any other owner, or sometimes any other board member who's not the president. This may sound insane, but it can happen. I mean, there are bad managing agents out there who just don't do a good job, don't respond, you can't ever get an answer out from them. And fortunately, this hopefully you can detect a little bit earlier on in the process. During the due diligence process, when you're emailing the managing agent for information about the building docs and such, you can gauge the professionalism then to a certain extent. One of the biggest risks of buying a condo is undisciplined spending by the condo board and the managing agent. So, oftentimes you'll see this if a condo building has raised common charges or monthly charges consecutively every year, perhaps by a significant margin over inflation, so what might be reasonably expected. Though with that said, we do know of many condo buildings who are very fiscally disciplined and do a great job and essentially never raise their common charges for years and years and years, sometimes decades. So it is possible to have that level of fiscal discipline. But on the other hand, you might see condo boards and buildings that are raising their common charges by double-digit percentage increases every year. And unfortunately, often that is the result of an undisciplined fiscal approach to budgeting. So, if you are on a board or you're privy to some of the budget discussions, you might see, a building where the condo board members are just completely out of it. They don't pay attention or care. And then you have a managing agent who, has these contractor relationships and just is trying to get the job done the easiest possible way, wants to make the vendors happy who they may have relationships with elsewhere. Hopefully they're not getting a kickback or anything. And, they just want to accept quotes as they come in. So various vendors to the building might say, hey, my line item, my cost for this year is going to increase 45%. And a bad building manager might just include that in the proposed budget for the new year without ever pushing back or trying to get different quotes. And then if you are in a nightmare situation where the board is also just completely asleep at the wheel, they'll just, you have to chase them for a response, and then they might not even look at the budget and they'll just say approve. And then boom, all of a sudden you have all of these line items that have increased, double 30, 40, 50% year on year, which leads to high common charge increases for all of the other owners. So that is obviously one of the biggest dangers to owning a condo. You might have a lack of fiscal discipline leading to increased common charges year over year. This leads us to the next point, which is related, and that is the risk that the condo board simply doesn't take charge. And oftentimes you'll see this risk in perhaps smaller buildings, though not necessarily always the case, but with a larger building, you do have a better chance that someone, say among 100, 200, 300 unit owners, is going to care enough about their ownership interests to take charge and be actively involved on the board. But with smaller buildings, you obviously run the risk that everyone's quote unquote so busy that they don't bother to take charge, they don't pay attention. So as discussed in the previous point, you have the real risk that the condo board is just completely unresponsive. No one bothers to take charge. There's no leading figure or officer who's really taking point and directing people to get different quotes, trying to keep costs low, trying to get projects moving. For example, if there's facade repairs, trying to coordinate and get things moving, and just no one does anything. And in that case, that can lead to some serious issues. Not only because costs might increase, because there's no fiscal overwatch or discipline, but because the building might get in some serious trouble. You might have severe fines from the city or county from basically being unresponsive to various requests or facade repairs perhaps that are needed that just are unattended to. There's lots of things that can go wrong which can get the building in a lot of trouble. Or for example, if there's certain sort of licenses or like a certificate of occupancy that needs to be renewed and it just doesn't get attended to, the building could be like legally uninhabitable. So there's a lot of risks that come with a condo board simply being asleep at the wheel. Another risk we'd like to talk about is shenanigans with the sponsor. So especially if it's a newer building, the original sponsor developer, or with the commercial unit owners. So oftentimes condo buildings might have some ground floor units that are commercial, retail in nature. Oftentimes they might be retained by the sponsor directly or perhaps a related entity, just because oftentimes those are so attractive to hold from a lease income perspective. So when you do see that, if it's a mixed-use building with commercial units, really check out to see who owns those units, and then really check out the offering plan to see, what sort of economics are going on behind the scenes. For example, oftentimes the offering plan, which is going to be written by the sponsor, might really favor the commercial unit owner, which the sponsor might be that commercial unit owner, and perhaps that commercial unit owner is only responsible for a minimal percentage of shared expenses such as electrical and such for the common areas, insurance. They might have a cap on how much they would be responsible for special assessments per year. Lots of shenanigans like that. And even worse, this is more rare to see these days in South Florida, but you used to see it more in the past, where sponsors would essentially retain all of the amenities and then lease them back to the condo, the HOA, at absurdly high rates, just to get some more bang for their buck. So, it's always important to speak with your lawyer and check for yourself really the offering plan, the building docs, just to see what's going on. Make sure there's nothing shady like this. No like arrangements that are extremely unbeneficial to the residential unit owners. Another risk to watch out for is unexpected special assessments. So this really goes along with everything else we talked about. With a condo building, of course, as an individual unit owner, you're not responsible for the exterior of the building. You're not responsible for flood insurance, the facade, the hallways and such. Really anything outside of the interior of your condo unit, you're not personally responsible for. However, you are still jointly responsible for all of those things, the entire building, with the other unit owners, based on your pro rata share of the common elements, your ownership interests. So, because there is upkeep requested, which might not be covered by your monthly common charges, for example, a major roof repair, an elevator replacement, perhaps if it's in New York City, you recently had a facade inspection, local law 11 facade inspection, and repairs are needed, and perhaps it's going to cost a little bit more because it's a landmark unit or whatnot, or landmark building, perhaps, whatever it might be, major repairs are needed. Well, that's probably not going to be covered unless you have a large reserve fund in the building by your common charges. So oftentimes what will happen is the condo board will agree to levy a special assessment, and that can be paid all at once. That could be paid over several months in installments, but it's going to be on top of your regular monthly common charges. And this can be a lot of money. This is not necessarily any joke. It could be a few $100,000 for something. It could be $100,000, $200,000 to repair an elevator. It could be $500,000 or more to repair a facade. So these are big numbers. Sometimes the board does have options. They could potentially borrow, especially if rates are attractive. They could borrow some of it to spread out the cost. But if that's not really an option, or they may just do a cash special assessment. So all the owners are going to be expected to pony up this extra amount. So it's definitely something to watch out for. Just because you're in a condo, you think you can escape sort of like what house owners face, like an unexpected broken water heater, and you're you're out of pocket for tens of thousands. Well, something similar basically can occur as well as a condo unit owner. Another reason why buying a condo might be a bad idea, depending on personal preference, is the fact that you'll have to share the building's amenities with other residents. And this is a personal preference. I mean, perhaps this is not as fun for someone who's an introvert. It might be totally okay for someone who's an extrovert and actually wants to live in a condo specifically to make new friends, meet other people, perhaps especially if they move to a new city. I mean, it's good to have neighbors to speak to and talk with. And sometimes some buildings, like the Caroline Miami Wellness Resort, they'll hold 20, 30 fitness classes a day where you can meet your neighbors, have some natural community built in. So some people might like it. Some people might not. They might prefer to have always the pool to themselves, and they don't like seeing other people or having to talk to other people. In that case, condo living might be annoying for you. Another annoyance with condo living is having limitations on parking for your guests, contractors, anybody who needs to come visit you. It might be difficult. I mean, you might have some limit on the number of free guest valets you can do if your building offers valet. There might be limits on the amount of space in the loading dock. You might have to reserve that loading dock if you have contractors coming by. As we'll discuss in another video on why contractors don't like to go to condo buildings, please check that out. You may also have difficulties with basically even valeting your contractors' trucks, because oftentimes there'll be tall vans and vehicles that won't fit, perhaps on the valet ramp and such, and then they got to go through the loading dock if there is one, and you might have to reserve that. The receiving office people might give them a hard time. So there's lots more to think about. Essentially, you're not the king of your own castle as you would be with a house where contractors can just park in your driveway. They don't have to ask anybody. You don't have to reserve anything. So that's one more thing to think about. The last thing we'll touch on today is building rules that you can't control. So this was seen most prominently during the COVID pandemic, when a lot of buildings had different rules. Even when city regulations shifted, buildings might have kept their own rules. This is especially prevalent in New York City, where oftentimes co-ops, condos would have much stricter COVID policies versus what versus what the city had at the time, which prevented showings, for example, of any type, or even visitors of any type. This was seen most often in New York. So this obviously can make condo living quite difficult. If you can't really even use any of the amenities because, due to some pandemic or crisis. So this is what actually helped the single family house boom in a large way, because people really just wanted their own space, not having to deal with any rules and such. Obviously here in South Florida, these restrictive measures were very, very light and for a very short duration. So, it has been over a year and many months where life has been normal in condos. So it's not really a factor at all anymore in South Florida. Not in most parts of New York as well, though you still have some buildings that have been more restrictive. But it's certainly something to think about, because there is the possibility, of course, of building rules that are not made by you, that are restrictive, which then kind of defeats the purpose of living in a condo, because you can't even use many of the amenities, for example. So we hope you found this video helpful. We, of course, are big fans of buying a condo and condo living, which we'll discuss in future videos. Please stay tuned. Leave us a comment if you have any questions below. And of course, if you're looking to buy or sell a property in New York or Florida, we can help you save 6% when you sell with an agent-assisted FSBO listing. And of course, when you buy, we can help you save 2% or more with the Hauseit buyer closing credit, where our brokers give you 2/3 of the buyer agent commission, subject to us keeping a minimum of 1%, or $7,500, whichever is higher. And of course, for example, here in Miami, new construction buildings often offer much more than 3% to buyers agents. They might offer 5, 6, 7%. So 2/3 of that back to you at closing can more than cover your closing costs. My name is Chris at Hauseit, and we'll see you on the next one.